I don't remember my mother's face. She died when I was 2, leaving just scattered photographs and Dad's stories to piece together who she was. My name is Kimberly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the truth is the only weapon you need against lies. Growing up in a politician's house meant getting used to empty spaces. Our mansion had 6 bedrooms, but most days it felt like I rattled around in there alone, like a marble in an empty box. Dad threw himself into his work after Mom died. For 2 years straight, he was just gone. Not physically, he still lived with us, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. "Your father's giving a speech tonight," Kimberly, my nanny, Sarah, would say, turning on the TV. "See? There he is." I'd press my little hands against the screen, trying to touch his face. That's how I usually saw him back then, through a glass barrier, talking to crowds of strangers instead of me. Thank God for Grandma Rose. She'd come over almost every day, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and stories about Dad when he was my age. I was 6 when everything changed. Dad came home one evening, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. "Kimberly, honey, I want you to meet someone special," he said. That's how Patricia entered our lives. My new stepmother was tall, perfectly put together, with this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember standing there in my Pokémon pajamas, looking up at her, and feeling something off. The first few months weren't too bad. Patricia mostly ignored me, which was fine by me. I had my own wing of the house anyway, my bedroom, bathroom, and a little study area where I did my homework. Sarah stayed on as my nanny, and between her and Grandma Rose, I barely had to interact with Patricia at all. But I started noticing things. Like how Patricia's smile would drop the second Dad left the room. Or how she'd accidentally schedule her fancy lunch parties during my piano recitals, so Dad had to choose between them. He always chose her events, couldn't disappoint the wife of a rising political star, after all. "Don't take it personally, sweetie," Grandma Rose would tell me. "Your father's just busy. The campaign trail is demanding." I tried not to. Really, I did. But it's hard not to take it personally when you're watching your father's career updates on YouTube instead of having dinner with him. When your stepmother's shopping sprees get more attention than your straight A's. High school changed everything. Dad started talking about my future more, probably because his advisors told him education was a hot topic for voters. Whatever the reason, I wasn't complaining. For the first time in years, he seemed actually interested in my life. "Yale, Harvard, Stanford, take your pick, Kimmy," he said one evening, surprising me by actually being home for dinner. "With your grades, you could get into any of them. I'll cover everything, tuition, housing, whatever you need." I nearly choked on my pasta. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Then came my 16th birthday. I walked outside that morning to find a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, complete with a massive red bow. Dad was standing there, grinning like a kid himself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," he dangled the keys in front of me. "Think you can handle it?" I screamed and hugged him so hard I probably wrinkled his $1,000 suit. For a moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one from before Mom died, before politics ate his life. Patricia's voice cut through my joy like ice. "A Mercedes? Really, Richard? For a 16-year-old? I could practically feel her glaring at my back as Dad showed me the car's features. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. "You're turning her into exactly what the opposition accuses us of representing, privileged, entitled rich kids." Patricia's voice carried through the walls. "What's next? A private jet for graduation? She's my daughter, Patricia. I've missed too many birthdays already. And how will it look when she wraps that car around a tree? Or when her spoiled little friends get her into drugs? Have you thought about your campaign?" After that, Patricia made it her mission to save me from myself, as she put it. Every time Dad mentioned college plans, she'd bring up some article about trust fund kids going wild at university. When I needed money for school supplies, she'd question every penny. "Kimberly, dear," she'd say in that sugary voice she used when her country club friends were over, "do tell everyone about that C you got in chemistry. Such a shame, especially with all the resources your father provides." Meanwhile, her own credit card bills were astronomical. "I'm so lonely when Richard's away," she'd pout to Dad. "Shopping is my only comfort. Another $5,000 handbag. Another spa weekend. Another renovation project." I tried staying out of it. Really, I did. But Patricia wouldn't let me. "Your father works so hard," she'd say loudly when her friends visited, "and some people just take without any gratitude." She'd look right at me while saying it. One day, I finally snapped. It was during one of her lunch parties. She'd been making little digs at me all afternoon, and I just couldn't take it anymore. "At least I'm not the one bleeding him dry with shopping sprees," I shot back. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. That evening, Dad called me into his study. "Patricia tells me you embarrassed her in front of her friends today. Kimberly, you need to try harder. She's doing her best to be a mother to you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. After that, I became a ghost in my own house. I took my meals in my room, timing my kitchen raids for when Patricia was out. I studied harder than ever, determined to get into a college far away from her. The only time I had to see her was when Dad was home, and then I'd play my part in our little family theater production. Winter break couldn't come fast enough that year. My friends had planned a snowboarding trip to Mountain Ridge Resort, and surprisingly, Patricia agreed when I asked permission. Dad was away on some campaign tour, as usual. "Here's money for the trip," Patricia said, holding out several $100 bills. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. "But remember, Kimberly, no showing off. We don't need stories about the politician's spoiled daughter making a scene at a ski resort." The morning we left, the sky was perfect, crystal clear blue, with fresh powder on the slopes. I'd been snowboarding at Mountain Ridge since I was 13, and the familiar rush of excitement filled me as we pulled into the parking lot. The first few runs were perfect. The wind in my face, the spray of snow, the absolute freedom, this was my happy place. No Patricia, no political drama, just me and the mountain. Then it happened. I still replay that moment in my head sometimes. I was on my favorite trail, coming down at a good clip. I'd done this run dozens of times before. But somehow, maybe I caught an edge, maybe I was going too fast, everything went wrong in an instant. The world spun. Sky, snow, sky, snow. I felt myself rolling, tumbling, my body hitting the slope again and again. There was pain, sharp and overwhelming, and then everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and people shouting in the distance. "Don't move." Someone was kneeling beside me. "The ski patrol is coming." The pain in my legs was excruciating. Through the haze, I heard words like multiple fractures and emergency transport. In the ambulance, once they'd given me something for the pain, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dad would know what to do. Dad would help. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. With growing desperation, I called Patricia. "What?" her sharp voice answered. "Patricia, there's been an accident." "I'm in an ambulance." "Of course there has." Her voice turned venomous. "You worthless little drunk. I knew you'd pull something like this. Stealing money wasn't enough, now you have to embarrass your father with a drunken accident?" "What? I wasn't drinking. I just fell." "Save your lies for someone else, you little thief. Don't bother calling again." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. Thief? Drunk? What was she talking about? "Miss, we're almost at the hospital," the paramedic said gently. "Is there someone else we can call for you?" I nodded numbly, giving them Grandma Rose's number. My legs throbbed with every bump in the road, but somehow the pain in my chest hurt worse. Hours passed in a blur of x-rays, doctors, and morphine. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dad to call back. He had to have gotten my messages by now. He had to know I was hurt. But no call came. The nurses were kind, bringing me extra blankets and Jell-O cups. But as night fell and I lay there alone in the sterile hospital room, listening to the beeping of machines, I felt more abandoned than I ever had in my life. I woke up to sunshine streaming through the hospital window and the familiar scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt okay. Then I saw her face. Grandma Rose looked older than I'd ever seen her, her usual warm smile replaced by something pained and worried. She was wringing her hands, something she only did when things were really bad. "Grandma, what's wrong? Is Dad coming?" She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Oh, Kimberly, your father called me last night. He's very angry, sweetheart. He says you put his whole campaign at risk." "What? How?" "He says," she paused, looking like each word hurt her. "He says you stole money from the house. That you were drinking with your friends on the mountain, got into some kind of fight, and then fell while intoxicated." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not true. None of that is true. I was just snowboarding, you know I've done it 100 times before." "I know, honey, I know," she reached for my hand. "But your father, he wants you to come stay with me after you're released. He says he's too disappointed to see you right now." The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. My own father thought I was a drunk thief? He wouldn't even come see me in the hospital? "But Grandma, you know me. You know I wouldn't." "Of course I know, sweetheart." She squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out. We always do." I spent the next few hours trying to process everything. My legs ached, but the pain in my heart was worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face from my 16th birthday, proud and smiling. How had everything gone so wrong? Then the door opened, and Patricia walked in. A nurse was checking my drip, and Patricia put on quite a show. "Oh, you poor dear," she cooed, patting my hand. "This must be so difficult for you." The nurse smiled approvingly at my stepmother's apparent concern. "She's lucky to have such a caring family," she said, making some notes on my chart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the nurse that this woman was the reason my own father wouldn't come see me. But I just lay there, watching Patricia play her part. As soon as the nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, something in my gut told me to reach for my phone. I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts when it came to Patricia. Quietly, I started the voice recorder. Just in time. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and triumphant. She perched on the edge of my bed, enjoying my discomfort as I tried to shift away. "Oh, Kimberly," she practically purred. "You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." "What are you talking about?" She laughed, not her usual polite titter, but a harsh, cruel sound. "You really are slow, aren't you? Let me spell it out for you. Daddy dearest thinks his precious little girl is a drunk and a thief." My throat went dry. You told him that?" "Of course I did. And the best part?" She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume making me nauseous. "He believed every word. That you stole thousands from his safe, money that's actually sitting quite nicely in my private account, by the way. That you were drinking and fighting on that mountain before your little accident. He'll never believe." "He already has." She was practically gloating now. "Your father won't be paying for any fancy colleges now. No more trust fund, no more inheritance. I've made sure of that. Soon, I'll be his sole heir, exactly as it should be." I felt the walls closing in. Why are you doing this?" "Because you're in my way. Always have been." His precious little reminder of his first wife. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. "But now you're just the family disappointment. The drunk, crippled daughter he'd rather forget." Tears were streaming down my face now. I'll get better, the doctors said. Please, she waved her hand dismissively. You'll be lucky if you ever walk normally again. Not that it matters, you won't need that fancy car of yours anymore. I'll be taking that off your hands. After all, what use does a disabled person have for a Mercedes? She walked to the door, then turned back with a smile that chilled me to my bones. Face it, Kimberly. You're all alone now. No money, no father, no future. Just you and your dear old grandmother, struggling to get by. Exactly where you belong. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the recording, her venomous words, now preserved forever in digital form. My fingers hovered over the phone screen as I contemplated what to do with this evidence. After I was discharged from the hospital, I did not return to my parents' place. Grandma Rose's house wasn't huge like my father's mansion, but it had something our old house never had: warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from love, not central heating. Recovery was hell. Physical therapy 3 times a week, endless exercises, learning to walk again step by excruciating step. Grandma Rose was there through all of it, holding my hand when the pain got too bad, celebrating every tiny victory. Between therapy sessions, I threw myself into my studies. My laptop became my classroom, video lectures, online assignments, virtual study groups. Some days I could barely get out of bed, but I still logged on, determined not to let Patricia's predictions about my future come true. Then came graduation time. I'd managed to keep my grades up despite everything, and the acceptance letters started arriving. Yale, Columbia, Berkeley. Each one a dream school, each one completely out of reach. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. It had been a year since the accident, since he'd abandoned me. Maybe now. Dad? My voice sounded small, even to myself. Kimberly. Cold. Formal. A politician's voice. I told you not to call. Please, just listen. I got into Yale. I'm not paying for college for a thief and a drunk. Don't call this number again. Click. I sat there, phone in hand, the recording from the hospital burning a hole in my pocket. I could have played it for him. Could have exposed Patricia's lies right then and there. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe it was the realization that a father who could believe those lies so easily, who could abandon his injured daughter without even hearing her side, maybe he didn't deserve the truth. I'll find another way, I told Grandma that night. And I did. I got a job as a barista, then picked up evening shifts at a bookstore. I learned to tune out the news when Dad's face appeared on TV, campaigning for his next big position. I stopped flinching when customers mentioned his name, stopped caring when they talked about what a family man he was. 3 years passed like that. Wake up, go to work, study in between shifts, save every penny. Grandma Rose helped as much as she could, even trying to sell her antique jewelry at one point. I wouldn't let her. You should be proud of yourself, she told me one evening as I counted my savings. I was about halfway to my goal. I realized. And I was. The girl who'd lived in that mansion, who'd driven that Mercedes, who'd waited desperately for her father's attention, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need his approval or his money. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Kimberly, darling, that honey-sweet voice. Patricia. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? Now, is that any way to talk to your loving stepmother? She laughed that fake laugh I remembered so well. Especially when I'm calling with such an opportunity for you. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you will be. Your father's campaign is ramping up again. His image team has this brilliant idea, focusing on family values. They want to do a series of interviews with you. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You'll talk about what a wonderful father Richard is, how supportive he's been. How close we all are as a family. The loving daughter, reunited with her devoted father and stepmother. The public will eat it up. The sheer audacity of it struck me speechless for a moment. 3 years of silence, of struggling, of rebuilding my life from scratch, and now they wanted me to play happy families? You're insane, I finally managed. Why would I ever help you? Her voice turned sharp. Because if you don't, you can forget about any inheritance. And don't forget, your father can still press charges for that money you stole. I never stole anything. You took that money. Your word against mine, dear. Who do you think people will believe? The respected politician's wife or the troubled, alcoholic daughter? Something snapped inside me. All these years of swallowing her lies, of taking the high road, for what? Go to hell, Patricia. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I sat at my tiny desk in Grandma's house. My laptop hummed to life. The audio files were right where I'd kept them all this time, Patricia's hospital room confession, and now this latest call too. 3 years ago, I'd chosen silence. Chose to walk away and rebuild on my own terms. But enough was enough. I opened my social media accounts. Started typing. For 3 years, I've stayed quiet about what really happened. I attached the audio files. Added screenshots of Patricia's threatening messages. Everything. My finger hovered over the post button. This would change everything, not just for Patricia and Dad, but for me too. No going back after this. I pressed post. I had no idea what I'd started. Within hours, my post went viral. By morning, it was everywhere, news sites, political blogs, social media. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters and TV producers. We'd love to have you tell your story on our morning show, they'd say. Or, this could really damage your father's campaign. Care to comment? I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Watching his polling numbers plummet didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. If anything, it made me feel hollow. Then, exactly 1 week after the post, my phone rang. Dad's number. Can we meet? He asked. His voice sounded different, tired, human. Please? We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, not the one where I worked, but a quiet place across town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished politician in his perfect suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. Kimberly, he said, standing up. I don't even know where to start. The beginning might be good, I said, sitting down. He took a deep breath. I heard the recordings. All of them. I'd been listening to them over and over, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. His voice cracked. I failed you. Not just after the accident, but for years before that. I was so focused on my career, on building this perfect political image, that I forgot what really mattered. Tears were streaming down his face now. I'd never seen my father cry before. Patricia confessed everything, he continued. The stolen money, the lies about you drinking, how she manipulated the whole situation after your accident. She admitted she'd been trying to drive us apart for years. He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. Can you ever forgive me? I started crying too. I missed you, Dad, so much. We stood up and hugged, right there in the middle of the coffee shop. 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that embrace. I've filed for divorce, he told me later. The lawyers are handling it. And I want to pay for your college, any school you want. It's the least I can do. Yale's still my dream school, I admitted. Then Yale it is. That evening, I made another post. This time, I told the whole story, not just Patricia's manipulation, but also how my father had owned his mistakes and chosen to make things right. To my surprise, people loved it. The story of a politician choosing his daughter over his image, admitting his failures, and working to make amends resonated with voters in a way no carefully crafted campaign message ever could. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at Yale. Dad helped me carry my boxes up, just like any other father would. Grandma Rose cried happy tears as she made my bed with fresh sheets. Patricia? Last I heard, she was living off her divorce settlement somewhere in Florida. Sometimes I think about sending her a thank you note. After all, her final power play was what ultimately brought my father and me back together. But mostly, I think about how healing isn't always quiet or private. Sometimes it takes a public explosion to clear the way for something better to grow. Sometimes you have to break everything down to build it back up right. As for me, I'm majoring in political science. Ironic, I know. But I figure someone needs to show the world that politics and truth aren't always enemies. And Dad? He won his next election. Turns out, people prefer real humanity over perfect facades anyway. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the truth does more than that. Sometimes, it brings you home. I'm Audrey, and I've always been the second best in my family. My sister, Sarah, is 5 years older than me and has always been the golden child. From the moment I can remember, everything in our house revolved around her. Sarah got the best of everything, and I got the leftovers. She went to some fancy private school, while I was stuck in the local public one. Don't get me wrong, my parents made good money, but apparently not enough for both of us to have nice things. I discovered my love for drawing when I was about 8. I'd spend hours sketching in my room, trying to capture the world around me on paper. When I showed my parents my drawings, hoping they'd be proud, Dad just shrugged. That's nice, Audrey, but don't waste too much time on it. You need to focus on getting a real job someday. You're not as academically inclined as your sister. Those words stung, but I didn't let them stop me. I started looking up drawing tutorials online, using my allowance to buy cheap art supplies. I'd hide in my room, painting and sketching, dreaming of the day I could show the world my art. Meanwhile, Sarah was the star of the family. Mom and Dad threw money at her like it was going out of style. Dance lessons, acting classes, singing tutors, you name it, Sarah tried it. And gave up on it, usually within a few months. I'm just not feeling the dance vibe anymore, Sarah announced one day, tossing her ballet shoes in the trash. I think I want to try photography now. Without missing a beat, Mom said, of course, sweetie. We'll get you the best camera and a new laptop for editing. Maybe we can convert the spare room into a darkroom for you. I couldn't believe my ears. Here I was, begging for a few dollars for paintbrushes, while Sarah got an entire room for her latest whim. But that's how it always was in our house. The only person who seemed to see me was Grandma Helen, Mom's mother. She lived nearby in a cozy little house, and visiting her became my escape. One day, she caught me sketching in her garden. Well, she said, peering over my shoulder. Looks like we've got a regular Picasso here. For the first time, someone looked at my art and saw potential. Grandma Helen's eyes sparkled as she hatched a plan. How about we set up a little studio for you here? I've got that spare room upstairs that's just collecting dust. Before I knew it, Grandma had transformed that dusty old room into an artist's paradise. She bought me an easel, real artist quality paints, and even signed me up for private lessons with a local artist. As the years rolled by, the gap between Sarah and me only widened. Our living room turned into a shrine to Sarah's so-called achievements. A massive display case dominated the wall, crammed with her certificates, ribbons, and trophies. Most of them were participation awards, but you'd think she'd won Olympic gold the way our parents fawned over them. One day, I timidly approached Mom with a small painting I'd done. It had just won first place in a local art competition. Hey, Mom? I was wondering if maybe we could put this up somewhere. Mom barely glanced at it. Oh, that's nice, honey. but where would we put it? The wall's already full of Sarah's things. Maybe you can keep it in your room? I retreated, clutching my painting. My room became my gallery, walls plastered with artwork that no one but me and Grandma Helen ever saw. When Sarah graduated high school, you'd have thought royalty was going off to college. Mom and Dad spared no expense, sending her to the most prestigious university they could find. They even rented her a luxury apartment near campus. With Sarah gone, you'd think I'd get more attention. Fat chance. Mom and Dad spent hours every day video chatting with her, cooing over her latest adventures. Meanwhile, I was lucky if they remembered I existed at dinner time. Then, like a hurricane, Sarah burst back into our lives. She'd barely graduated when she showed up on our doorstep with a guy in tow. "Mom, Dad," she squealed. "Meet Jake, my husband." Mom and Dad, instead of asking the obvious questions, like, "Oh, I don't know," why they weren't invited to the wedding, just embraced them both. "Oh, sweetie, we're so happy for you," Mom gushed. "Welcome to the family, son." Dad slapped Jake on the back. I stood in the background, invisible as always. Congrats, I guess," I muttered. Sarah barely acknowledged me. "Thanks. Oh, by the way, Jake's going to be living with us for a while." "That's cool, right?" Before I could process what was happening, Jake was moving his stuff into our guest room. Just like that, our household dynamic shifted again. 2 months flew by in a blur of awkward family dinners and tense silences. Sarah and Jake had taken over the house like a pair of entitled royals, and I was counting down the days until I could escape to college. Then, one evening, Dad called me into the living room. "Audrey, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from those words in this house. Mom and Dad sat on the couch, with Sarah and Jake lounging nearby. I perched on the edge of an armchair, feeling like I was facing a firing squad. Dad cleared his throat. "Audrey, you know we've been saving for your college fund." I nodded, a glimmer of hope rising in my chest. Maybe they were finally going to do right by me. "Well," he continued, "we'd decided to give that money to Sarah instead." The world stopped. I must have misheard. "What?" Mom jumped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Sweetie, Sarah needs it more. She's married now, starting a family. We have to think about their future." I looked at Sarah, who couldn't even meet my eyes. Jake just smirked. The injustice of it all hit me like a tidal wave. "Are you kidding me? You've given Sarah everything her whole life, and now you're taking away the one thing you promised me?" "Watch your tone, young lady," Mom snapped. "You should be grateful we're not charging you rent for living here and eating our food all these years." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Grateful? For doing the bare minimum as parents? Dad stood up, his face red. "That's enough. You're an adult now, Audrey, it's time you started acting like one." He disappeared into the hallway and returned with a new suitcase. He dropped it at my feet with a thud that echoed through my soul. "Consider this your graduation gift," he said coldly. "Pack your things and get out, tonight." I looked at each of them in turn, Dad's stern face, Mom's averted eyes, Sarah's guilty expression, Jake's smug grin. Not one of them spoke up for me. In that moment, something inside me broke. And in its place, a steely resolve took root. Without a word, I grabbed the suitcase and marched to my room. As I threw my belongings into it, I could hear Sarah's excited chatter through the wall. "Oh my God, Jake. We can turn Audrey's room into my walk-in closet. I've always wanted one of those." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. In less than an hour, I had packed up 18 years of my life. I took one last look around the room that had been my sanctuary, my prison. Then, without saying goodbye, I walked out the front door. I stumbled up to Grandma Helen's porch, dragging my suitcase behind me. Before I could even knock, the door flew open, and there she was, arms outstretched. "Oh, Audrey," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I broke down then, ugly sobs racking my body as Grandma held me. She guided me inside, sat me on her worn but comfortable couch, and listened as I poured out the whole sordid tale. When I finished, Grandma's eyes were blazing. "Those fools," she muttered. Then she took my hands in hers. "Audrey, listen to me. You're staying here, and we're going to figure this out together." I slept fitfully that night, but when I came downstairs the next morning, Grandma was at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and her laptop. "Sit down," she said, pushing a mug of coffee towards me. "We're planning your college education, I'm paying for it. Now, let's find you a proper art school." Over the next few weeks, Grandma and I pored over college brochures and websites. We finally settled on a prestigious art school a few hours away. I gathered my best paintings and drawings, carefully photographing each one for my portfolio. I wrote and rewrote my personal essay, pouring my heart onto the page. Grandma helped me collect glowing recommendations from my art teachers. Finally, we sent it all off. The waiting was excruciating, but Grandma kept me busy, encouraging me to paint and even setting up a small exhibition of my work in her garden for the neighbors. Then, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, the email arrived. I stared at my phone, too nervous to open it. "Well?" Grandma prompted. With trembling fingers, I tapped the screen. My eyes scanned the first line, and I let out a scream of joy. "I got in!" I shouted, jumping up and down. "Grandma, I got in!" From the moment I set foot on campus, I threw myself into every opportunity. I joined the art club, volunteered at gallery openings, and spent countless hours in the studios, honing my craft. My first art competition was terrifying, but when I won third place, the rush was indescribable. I called Grandma immediately, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "Just the beginning," she said. "Keep going." So I did. I entered more competitions, each one boosting my confidence. I started participating in exhibitions for young artists, seeing my work displayed alongside my peers. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Professors praised my unique style, classmates asked for collaborations, and I even started selling a few pieces. But it wasn't just about the art. I made friends, real friends who valued me for who I was. I joined study groups, went to parties, and even started dating a fellow artist named Ethan. Late one night, as I was putting the finishing touches on a painting for my midterm project, I realized something. All of this, was what I'd been yearning for my whole life. The freedom to express myself, to grow, to be valued for my talents and my personality. Graduation day arrived in a blur of black gowns and flying mortarboards. I landed a job at a local art gallery, arranging exhibits by day and pouring my soul onto canvas by night. It wasn't glamorous, I was basically a glorified clerk, but it was a foot in the door of the art world. "Hey, Audrey," my boss, Frank, called out one day. "We've got a spare wall next week. Want to hang some of your stuff?" I nearly dropped the sculpture I was carrying. "Are you serious?" He shrugged. "Why not? Your stuff's good. Might as well see if it sells." That little display changed everything. A couple of my paintings sold, then a few more. Soon, I was participating in local exhibitions, my name starting to buzz in art circles. Then came the fantasy series. It started as a fever dream, strange, whimsical creatures dancing across my canvas. I painted them obsessively, creating a whole world of odd, lovable beings. At one exhibition, a man in a sharp suit approached me. "Ms. Thompson? I'm from Dreamscape Animations. We're very interested in your work." Before I knew it, I was signing a contract. They wanted to turn my creatures into a cartoon. The day the first episode aired, Grandma and I sat glued to her TV, clutching each other's hands. "That's my little Gribble," I squealed as one of my creations waddled across the screen. The show was a hit. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of Audrey Thompson's art. The animation studio commissioned a comic series, which I drew with giddy enthusiasm. As my reputation grew, so did the price tags on my paintings. It was surreal, watching collectors bid on my work like it was precious treasure. Frank, my boss at the gallery, pulled me aside one day. "Audrey, you're outgrowing us. How about we do a solo exhibition for you? Your own show, your rules." I threw myself into preparation, creating new pieces and carefully selecting from my existing work. The night of the opening, I stood in the gallery, surrounded by my art and a buzzing crowd. "Quite a turnout," a familiar voice said. I turned to see Frank, grinning. "Listen, kid, you're going places. How about I manage you full-time? We could really take your career to the next level." From that moment, everything accelerated. With Frank's connections and my creativity, we were unstoppable. My paintings hung in prestigious galleries, my name featured in art magazines. Through it all, Grandma Helen was my constant. She came to every exhibition, beaming with pride and offering words of encouragement. "Remember when you used to hide your drawings under your bed," she said one night as we celebrated another successful show. "Look at you now, setting the art world on fire." I hugged her tight, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You believed in me when no one else did." As we clinked our champagne glasses, I marveled at how far I'd come. From the unwanted second child to a rising star in the art world. But even with all the success, the best part was having Grandma by my side, sharing every triumph and setback. One day I burst into Grandma Helen's kitchen, my mind buzzing with ideas. "Grandma, you won't believe what Frank and I have planned. We're thinking of a cross-country tour, showcasing my work in major cities. And there's talk of an international exhibition in Paris next year." Grandma listened, her eyes twinkling with pride. But as I paused for breath, she reached out and took my hand. "Audrey, darling, I'm so proud of you. You've become such an accomplished young woman. But I think it might be time to consider reconciling with your parents." I wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped me. This was important to her. A week later, I found myself standing on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Mom answered the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Audrey," she said, her voice uncertain. "What are you doing here?" Dad appeared behind her, his face unreadable. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in, I suppose." The house hadn't changed much, but the atmosphere was heavy, oppressive. They grudgingly allowed me to stay for a few days, but it was clear I wasn't welcome. To my surprise, Sarah was still living at home. "Jake's gone," she said bitterly when I asked. "Mom and Dad kicked him out. Said he was a lazy bum." I bit back a retort about their double standards. This visit wasn't about settling old scores. Days crawled by in uncomfortable silence. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, their faces constantly pinched with disapproval. I was about ready to call it quits when Sarah cornered me in the kitchen. "So," she said, a familiar mocking tone in her voice, "what are you up to these days? Still doodling?" Something snapped inside me. I straightened up, meeting her gaze. "Actually, I'm one of the most popular and well-paid young artists in the country right now." The kitchen fell silent. I turned to see Mom and Dad frozen in the doorway. Suddenly, their entire demeanor changed. Mom's eyes lit up with a greedy gleam I'd seen directed at Sarah so many times before. "Oh, Audrey," she cooed, trying to take my arm. "Why didn't you tell us? We've been so worried about you." I jerked away from her touch. "I was just leaving, actually." No, Dad interjected. "Stay. Tell us more about your work. How much do your paintings sell for?" I shook my head. "That's confidential information." His face hardened. "Now listen here, young lady. We're your parents. We have a right to know. After all we've done for you, you owe us." And there it was. The true colors I knew had been there all along. "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. "You kicked me out, remember? You chose Sarah over me at every turn. And now that I'm successful, you want a piece of it? No, I'm done. I brushed past them, ignoring their protests and demands. I threw my things into my bag and walked out the door, their angry voices fading behind me. When I told Grandma what happened, she smiled sadly. "Oh, Audrey, I'm sorry it went that way. But I'm proud of you for trying." As I drove home that night, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd given them a chance, more than they deserved. Now I could move forward, guilt-free, focusing on the people who truly cared about me and the art that had saved me. That call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Grandma Helen was in the hospital. I dropped everything and rushed to her side, my heart in my throat. For weeks, I barely left her room. I held her hand, told her stories, and tried to repay a fraction of the love and support she'd given me over the years. But in the end, she was gone. I threw myself into organizing the funeral, grateful for the distraction from my grief. It was a beautiful service, filled with people whose lives Grandma Helen had touched. I stood alone by her grave long after everyone else had left, feeling more lost than I had in years. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a notary. "Ms. Thompson, we need to discuss your grandmother's will." I sat in the sterile office, numb, as the lawyer read out the details. "And to my beloved granddaughter, Audrey Thompson, I leave all my worldly possessions, including my house and savings." I couldn't believe it. Grandma Helen had left me everything. I was just starting to find my footing again when Sarah showed up on my doorstep. "Audrey," she said, her eyes red-rimmed. "I need your help. I'm pregnant. I left Mom and Dad, I couldn't take their nagging anymore. But now I have nowhere to go, no money." I listened, a mix of pity and suspicion churning in my gut. "Sarah, I'm sorry you're in this situation, but what do you expect me to do?" "Give me my share," she demanded. "I need Grandma's money." I shook my head. "There is no your share, Sarah. Grandma left everything to me." Her face contorted with rage. "That's not fair. You must have tricked her, you thief. I'll take you to court, you'll see." I slammed the door, my hands shaking. But it wasn't over. The next day, Mom called. "Audrey, be reasonable," she wheedled. "Your sister needs help. We're family, you owe us." "I don't owe you anything," I replied, my voice ice cold. "You kicked me out, remember? Where was your sense of family then?" I hung up. But they weren't done. Suddenly, my social media was flooded with accusations. Posts from my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all claiming I'd manipulated Grandma Helen, that I was a thief who'd stolen their rightful inheritance. Then came the rumors of a lawsuit. Apparently, Sarah and my parents had gone to a lawyer, convinced they could challenge the will. But as quickly as the rumors started, they died down. The law was clear, Grandma Helen's will was ironclad. Through it all, I clung to Grandma's last words to me. "Be strong. Keep painting your dreams." And that's exactly what I did. I poured my pain and anger into my art, creating some of my most powerful pieces yet. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind of color and creativity. My paintings hung in prestigious galleries across the country, my name was featured in art magazines, and I even did a few TV interviews. It was surreal, seeing my face on the screen, talking about my journey and my art. But even as I reveled in my success, a shadow lurked at the edges of my life. Despite their failed attempts to challenge Grandma's will, my parents and Sarah hadn't given up their campaign of harassment. I'd learned to ignore it, to focus on my art and the positive relationships in my life. Then came the night of my biggest exhibition yet. The gallery was packed, the atmosphere electric. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by my latest works, feeling on top of the world. "Audrey, darling, this is your best show yet," Frank gushed, clapping me on the back. That's when I saw them. Mom and Dad, pushing through the crowd, their faces twisted with rage. Before I could react, Mom had uncapped a can of paint and flung it at my centerpiece. "Thief!" Dad bellowed as the red paint dripped down the protective glass. She stole our money. The room erupted into chaos. Security guards rushed in, wrestling my parents towards the exit. Guests whispered and pointed, their shocked faces illuminated by camera flashes. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. This was supposed to be my moment of triumph, and they'd turned it into a circus. As the guards escorted my parents out, Mom's shrill voice echoed through the gallery. She tricked her grandmother. That money should have been ours. The exhibition was effectively over. Even though the paintings were undamaged, thanks to their protective coverings, the mood was shattered. As I watched the last guests trickle out, something inside me hardened. Enough was enough. The next morning, I marched into a lawyer's office. I want a restraining order, I said, my voice steady. And I want to sue for defamation. I laid out everything, the social media harassment, the threatening messages, the scene at the gallery. The lawyer listened, his expression grave. We have a strong case, he assured me. They've gone too far. The legal process was grueling, but I stood my ground. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. My parents and Sarah were legally barred from contacting me, or coming near me or my property. The defamation suit was settled out of court, with a public retraction of their claims. As I left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work with renewed passion. I traveled the world, finding inspiration in bustling cities and quiet villages alike. My exhibitions became events, celebrated in the art world and beyond. But more than the fame or the money, I found joy in giving back. I started a program offering free art classes to kids from low-income families, remembering how art had been my lifeline. Years have passed since that day in court. I haven't spoken to my parents or Sarah since, and I don't intend to. Some bridges, once burned, are better left in ashes. But I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. Grateful for Grandma Helen, who believed in me when no one else did. Grateful for the struggles that shaped me and the triumphs that followed.
This story is titled, I Canceled the Wedding I Paid For After My Stepdaughter Banned Me from Her Wedding. Now they're begging for my help. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, big news. I've launched a new Reddit channel. This time, the background isn't Minecraft. It's Subway Surfers in a Christmas theme to match the season. Check it out, subscribe, and join the fun. Links in the description. See you there. Now let's start the video. 17 years. That's how long I was with Lisa. We met when I was in my late 30s, doing well for myself after years of grinding in my career. I'd finally hit a point where I could relax and enjoy the fruits of my hard work. Then Lisa walked into my life, a single mom with a young daughter, Erica, who was about 9 years old at the time. Lisa was smart, funny, and had this charm that made me think, she just needs a break. Little did I know I'd be handing out breaks left and right while they just took advantage. When we first got together, I didn't mind stepping up. Erica needed a bike? Done. Lisa wanted to finish school? I covered her tuition. I didn't think of it as buying their affection, but as a way to help out. I figured if I was going to be with Lisa, I couldn't ignore Erica. If anything, I thought, maybe I can be a positive influence in her life. As time went on, I ended up doing way more than I ever signed up for. Private school for Erica? Paid for. Extracurriculars, new laptops every couple of years, and trips with her classmates? All me. When Erica wanted a special designer prom dress that cost more than my first car, I didn't bat an eye. I thought, why not? After all, I was building something with Lisa and Erica, and I wanted them to have the best. The thing is, it never felt like I was part of the family. Erica was polite, sure, but distant. She'd give me that fake smile when I handed her a gift, then head off to her room without so much as a thank you. Lisa would brush it off, saying, teenagers are just like that. But it started to wear on me. Still, I figured it would get better as Erica got older. By the time Erica was in college, I was paying over $90,000 for her private school education. Lisa said it was an investment in her future, and I agreed. I wanted Erica to have opportunities I never had. When she graduated last year, I even surprised her with a brand new Mercedes-Benz GLE. Black, sleek, fully loaded. Erica was thrilled, giving me the first genuine hug I'd gotten from her in years. For a moment, I thought, maybe I'm finally getting through to her. Fast forward to now. Erica's engaged to some guy named Brian. He's decent enough, I guess. works in finance, comes from a well-off family, and seems to genuinely care about her. Lisa was over the moon about the engagement, constantly gushing about how Erica was set for life. She kept saying things like, "Brian's such a good match for her. He's so stable." The wedding planning started almost immediately, and Lisa was treating it like the event of the century. We're talking a vineyard venue, a custom menu, a live string quartet, the works. The guest list was pushing 350, and every detail screamed luxury. Naturally, I was footing the bill. Why? Because I could afford it, and I wanted Erica to have her dream wedding. Or so I thought. Little things started to nag at me during the planning. Erica and Lisa would have these planning sessions where I wasn't invited. "It's just girl stuff," Lisa would say, waving me off. When I suggested inviting a few of my close friends, Lisa gave me this look and said, "The guest list is already so tight." Tight? There were 350 people on that list, but apparently there wasn't room for people who'd been in my corner for decades. Let's talk about Greg. This guy is the definition of a deadbeat. If there were a Hall of Fame for absentee dads, his face would be front and center. I've been with Lisa for 17 years, and in all that time, I can count on one hand how many times Greg has shown up for Erica. And let's be clear, when I say showed up, I don't mean he came through in any meaningful way. No, I'm talking about the kind of appearances where he rolls in, drops a few half-assed compliments, and then vanishes before the dishes are clean. The thing that gets me, though, is how Erica sees him. To her, Greg is some kind of superhero. When she was younger, she'd run to the door yelling, "Dad's here," like he was Santa Claus. Meanwhile, I was the one who'd been there every single day, making sure she had everything she needed. I don't know what fairy tale she's telling herself, but the reality is, Greg hasn't contributed a single cent to her life. No child support, no birthday presents, not even a lousy card. One time, Lisa told me Greg had a rough patch after the divorce. Apparently, the poor guy needed space to figure things out. Space? He didn't need space. He needed a job and a clue. But Lisa, being Lisa, never pushed him. She made excuses for him like it was her part-time job. "He's still her dad," she'd say, as if that gave him a free pass to do absolutely nothing. What really gets under my skin is how Greg shows up just enough to keep Erica on the hook. He's not completely out of the picture. Oh no, that would make too much sense. Instead, he breezes in a couple of times a year, just often enough to keep the cool dad image alive. He'll take Erica out for dinner at some mid-tier chain restaurant, give her some vague advice about life, and then disappear for months. And every time Erica comes back beaming, like she just spent a weekend with Oprah. And don't even get me started on Lisa's role in all this. She's always made sure Greg had a seat at the table, figuratively and literally. One time, he called to say he wanted to see Erica. This was after a solid year of radio silence, mind you. Lisa practically rolled out the red carpet for him. She cooked this big dinner, made sure Erica was all dressed up, and even asked me to step out for the evening so they could have family time. I'll admit, that one stung. But I played along because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I figured if Erica needed Greg in her life, I wasn't going to stand in the way. I thought I was being the bigger person. In hindsight, I was just being a sucker. The thing is, Greg doesn't even try to pretend he's involved. He's not showing up at Erica's school events or helping her move into her college dorm. He didn't chip in for her tuition, books, or anything else. But somehow, he gets to waltz into her life and be dad. While I'm just, what? The guy who pays for everything? The glorified babysitter? It's insulting. One time I tried to bring this up with Lisa. I told her, "You know, it feels like I'm doing all the heavy lifting while Greg gets all the praise." She gave me this tired look, like she'd heard it all before, and said, "You're overthinking it. Erica loves you. Greg's just Greg." What does that even mean? Greg's just Greg? Is that supposed to justify his complete lack of effort? I let it go because arguing with Lisa about Greg is like trying to teach a fish to ride a bike. Pointless. Oh, and now the wedding. When Erica announced she was engaged, I was genuinely happy for her. I thought, this is my chance to really be a part of something special. The worst part was the wedding invitation. When they arrived, I opened mine, expecting to see my name somewhere, anywhere. But nope, there it was in black and white. Greg Reynolds, father of the bride. Not a mention of me. I didn't even get a footnote. It was like I didn't exist. I thought about confronting Erica about it, but honestly, what would be the point? She'd just tell me it was a mistake, or that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was a huge deal. I've spent the better part of 2 decades trying to be a good stepdad, only to be completely erased when it mattered most. And Greg? Oh, he was loving every second of it. I caught him grinning like the cat that ate the canary when Lisa mentioned the father-daughter dance. I wanted to wipe that smug look off his face, but I kept my cool. Barely. At this point, it's not even about the money. I don't care about the tens of thousands I've spent on Erica's life. I care about the principle. It's not fair, and it's not right. Then comes the night when everything changed. It was a Friday night. I organized this fancy dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in town. I spared no expense. Private dining room, a custom menu with dishes I can't even pronounce, and personalized service for all of us. I figured, this is a celebration of Erica's wedding, and I'm happy to do it for the family. Little did I know, this dinner would be the final nail in the coffin. Everyone was there. Lisa, Erica, Greg, Erica's fiancé Brian, and Brian's parents, Linda and Robert. To me, it was a way of showing support and goodwill. I wanted everyone to feel like part of a team, like we were all coming together for Erica's big day. I was still clinging to this naive idea that I was part of the family. Big mistake. The night started off fine, or at least I thought so. The drinks were flowing. I don't drink, but everyone else was enjoying it. The food looked incredible, and the mood seemed light. Brian's parents were polite, making small talk about the wedding plans and how lovely the vineyard venue was. Erica was glowing, talking about her dress fittings and flower arrangements. Greg? Well, Greg was sitting there like he owned the place, leaning back in his chair with that smug look I've grown to hate. I tried to keep things light, chatting with Brian about his work in finance and asking Linda and Robert about their travel plans for the summer. Lisa was doing her usual thing, hovering around Greg, making sure he had everything he needed and acting like he was some kind of VIP. I brushed it off because honestly, I just wanted the night to go smoothly. Then Erica stood up. She clinked her glass, signaling she wanted to make a toast. I sat back, expecting some heartfelt words about family and gratitude. Instead, she says, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is such a special time for me and Brian, and I'm so lucky to have all of you in my life. Okay, not a bad start. I was waiting for her to say something about me, maybe a nod to the guy paying for everything. But no, she turned to Greg and said, I'm especially grateful to my dad. He's been my rock, and I'm so excited that he'll be walking me down the aisle. The table erupted in applause. Greg leaned back, smirking like he'd just been handed the keys to the city. Lisa was clapping and smiling like she'd just witnessed a miracle. Even Brian's parents were nodding along, like this was some heartwarming family moment. Meanwhile, I sat there in stunned silence, gripping my fork so tight I thought it might snap. I don't even know how to describe what I was feeling. Betrayed? Angry? Humiliated? Probably all of the above. Here I was, hosting this lavish dinner, paying for every last detail of Erica's wedding, and this is how I get treated? Like I'm invisible? When the applause died down, I stood up. I wasn't planning to make a scene, but I couldn't just sit there and take it. I raised my glass and said, well, if Greg is walking you down the aisle, then Greg can pay for the wedding. I'm out. You could have heard a pin drop. The look on Erica's face was priceless. Her jaw literally dropped. Lisa looked like she'd just seen a ghost. Brian froze mid-sip, and his parents exchanged awkward glances. Greg? For the first time all night, he wasn't smirking. He looked like someone had yanked the rug out from under him. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I set my glass down, threw my napkin on the table, and walked out. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I left, but I didn't care. I'd had enough. When I got home, I sat down in the living room, trying to process what had just happened. 17 years of bending over backward for Lisa and Erica, and this is what it came to? They didn't just take me for granted, they outright disrespected me. Greg, the guy who's done nothing for Erica her entire life, gets to be the star, while I'm treated like an afterthought. It was infuriating. Lisa came home about an hour later. I heard her keys jangling in the door, and I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. Sure enough, she stormed into the living room, her face red with anger. What the hell was that? She demanded. I looked at her, completely calm, and said, that was me finally standing up for myself. You embarrassed Erica in front of everyone, she shot back. You couldn't have picked a worse time to make a scene. A scene? I laughed bitterly. The scene was Erica thanking Greg for being her rock while I sat there like a damn fool, and you let this happen. Lisa rolled her eyes. Oh, stop being so dramatic. Greg's her father. This is what she wants. And what about what I want, Lisa? Does that matter? Or am I just the guy who only pays for everything? She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she turned the argument around, accusing me of ruining Erica's big day and making it all about myself. I just shook my head. There was no point in arguing with her. She didn't get it, and she never would. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. After that Friday night dinner fiasco, I woke up the next morning feeling oddly calm. Maybe it was the kind of calm that comes with clarity. I wasn't stewing over it, Wasn't second-guessing myself. I just knew exactly what needed to be done. If Greg wanted to play the role of dad so badly, he could have the whole package. Let him handle the stress, the logistics, and most importantly, the checkbook. I was officially out. The first thing I did was sit down at my computer and log into the joint account Lisa and I shared. I moved every cent I had put in for Erica's wedding into my personal account. Not gonna lie, it felt good. I even double-checked to make sure everything was secure. Lisa didn't work, hadn't for years, and I wasn't about to let her siphon off money for a wedding I was no longer funding. Next, I grabbed my phone and started making calls. First up was the caterer. I'd hired this high-end catering company. The food alone was costing me close to $20,000. I explained the situation to the manager, something about unforeseen circumstances. I didn't feel like airing my dirty laundry to a stranger. Surprisingly, they were cool about it. Since the wedding was still a few months away, they agreed to cancel without any penalties. Full refund. One down, many more to go. Then there was the venue. This was the big one. Beautiful place, sure, but also ridiculously expensive. I think the deposit alone was around $10,000. When I called, the event coordinator sounded annoyed, like I'd personally ruined her day by canceling. She explained that the deposit was non-refundable, which I already knew. Fine, keep your $10,000. It was worth losing that chunk of change to get out of this mess. While I was on hold with the venue, I glanced at my car keys sitting on the counter and had an idea. Erica's Mercedes. I'd given her that car after she graduated college, thinking it was a nice gesture for all her hard work. In reality, she'd barely passed, and I'd probably spent more time arranging her graduation party than she spent studying. But whatever. I bought her the car, because I thought it would make her happy. Now, though, that car was mine. It was in my name, and there was no way I was letting her keep it after everything that happened. I logged onto a car-selling app and posted it right then and there. Within a few hours, I had a buyer lined up. By the end of the week, the Mercedes was gone, and I had an extra $50,000 in my pocket. You know what? It felt great. After the venue, I called the photographer. This was another expensive booking because Erica and Lisa insisted on hiring some award-winning artist who didn't just take photos, but captured memories, whatever that means. The guy was surprisingly understanding. He even said he had a wait list of couples who'd been hoping to snag my date, so he was happy to refund the deposit. I spent the rest of the day going down the list of vendors, the florist, the band, the cake designer. Every phone call was another small victory. Most of them were polite, a few were annoyed, but I didn't care. By the end of the day, I'd clawed back nearly $30,000. Sure, I lost a few deposits along the way, but considering how much the whole wedding was going to cost, it was a small price to pay for my peace of mind. While I was handling all this, Lisa was suspiciously quiet. She knew I was upset after the dinner, but I don't think she realized just how serious I was. She didn't ask me what I was doing or where I was going, which was unusual for her. Normally, she was all up in my business, but now, radio silence. I think she assumed I'd cool down after a day or two, and things would go back to normal. By the time Lisa finally confronted me, I was already halfway through dismantling Erica's dream wedding. She found me sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, contracts, receipts, and bank statements. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm canceling the wedding," I said without looking up. Her jaw practically hit the floor. "You're what?" "You heard me," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "I'm not paying for a wedding where I'm treated like an outsider. If Greg wants to be the big man, let him step up for once." She stared at me, speechless. For a moment, I thought she might start crying, but then her face hardened. "You can't just do this. Erica's counting on you." "Is she?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like she's counting on Greg." Lisa started to argue, throwing out every excuse in the book. "You're overreacting," she said. "This is about Erica's happiness, not you. You're being selfish." Selfish. That word hit me like a slap in the face. I'd spent many years putting their needs ahead of my own, giving them everything they wanted without asking for much in return. And now, when I finally stood up for myself, I was the selfish one? I stood up, towering over her. Selfish? Let me tell you what selfish looks like. Selfish is erasing me from Erica's life while I pay for everything. Selfish is letting Greg waltz in and take credit for things he didn't do. If you think I'm selfish, maybe you should take a good look in the mirror. Lisa stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I could hear her pacing upstairs, probably calling Erica to vent about how unreasonable I was being. Let them complain. I didn't care anymore. The next morning, I woke up early, poured myself a cup of coffee, and went back to work. I called the string quartet and canceled their booking. They were disappointed but polite, and I got most of my money back. I emailed the company making the custom wedding invitations and told them to stop production. They hadn't printed anything yet, so they refunded the full amount. By the time I was done, the wedding was essentially dismantled. No venue, no caterer, no band, no cake, and no Mercedes sitting in Erica's driveway. It was like the wedding had never existed. And honestly, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Lisa didn't say much after that. She spent most of her time in the guest room, avoiding me. Erica started blowing up my phone with texts, accusing me of ruining her life. I didn't respond to any of them. I was done being their doormat, and I wasn't about to apologize for taking back control of my own life. When the last vendor confirmed the cancellation, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't being pulled in 100 different directions. I wasn't trying to make everyone happy at my own expense. I was finally free. You'd think after canceling the wedding, they'd get the message that I was done. But no. The moment the dust started settling, the begging began. First it was Erica, then Lisa, and eventually even Greg decided to throw his hat into the ring. Let me tell you, watching them scramble was equal parts satisfying and pathetic. It started with Erica. A few days after I pulled the plug, she texted me. No apology, no acknowledgement of how things had played out. Just straight to the guilt trip. I don't understand why you're punishing me. I just wanted my dad involved in my wedding. Can't you be happy for me? I stared at my phone, trying to decide if it was worth replying. Punishing her? Seriously? I was the one who had paid for her entire lifestyle. And now I was punishing her? Yeah, no. I didn't bother replying. I wasn't in the mood for a back and forth where I'd be painted as the bad guy, no matter what I said. A few hours later, she tried again. Can we please talk about this? You're making everything so stressful for me. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life. Stressful? Oh, now she was stressed? Again, I ignored her. If she wanted to talk, she could start by acknowledging her role in all of this. But of course, that never happened. The next day, Lisa decided to chime in. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. Her arms crossed and her face set in that familiar, I'm right and you're wrong expression she's perfected over the years. We need to talk, she said. I sighed. About what? You know what? She snapped. You're ruining Erica's wedding. Do you have any idea how upset she is? She's been crying nonstop since you canceled everything. Good, I said flatly. Maybe she'll finally appreciate everything I've done for her. Lisa looked at me like I'd just grown a second head. You can't be serious. You're acting like a child. This isn't about you. It's about Erica. And yet, I said, leaning against the counter, I was the one paying. So yeah, it is about me. That set her off. She launched into this long-winded rant about how I was being selfish, how I was letting my pride ruin what should have been a happy occasion, and how I was tearing the family apart. I let her go on for a bit, mostly because I wanted to see how far she'd take it. But when she started crying, yes, the crocodile tears made an appearance, I cut her off. Lisa, let me ask you something, I said, keeping my voice calm. Where was this energy when Erica decided to write me out of the wedding? She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. No, don't answer, because we both know the truth. You didn't care then, and you don't care now. All you care about is me paying for the wedding so you and Erica can keep pretending Greg is some amazing dad. She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her face a mix of anger and something that almost looked like guilt. Almost. I'm done, I said, turning back to my coffee. You want a wedding? Figure it out yourself, as a family. Lisa stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I figured that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how desperate they were. A day later, Greg called. Yes, Greg decided to weigh in. When I saw his name pop up on my phone, I almost didn't answer, but out of curiosity, I answered. Hello. Hey, man, he said, his voice annoyingly casual, like we were old buddies. Listen, I heard about what happened and I just wanted to talk. About what? I asked, already annoyed. Well, about the wedding, he said. Look, I get that you're upset, but don't you think you're overreacting a bit? I actually laughed. Overreacting? Greg, you've been a dad in name only for 20 years, and now you're telling me how I should feel? He ignored that and kept going. I know I haven't been as involved as I could have been, but this isn't about us. It's about Erica. She's devastated, man. Can't you just let it go for her sake? Let it go? The audacity of this guy. I'd spent years cleaning up his messes, and now he had the nerve to tell me to let it go. Greg, let me make something clear, I said, my voice steady. You wanted to play dad? Great. Step up and be a dad for once. Otherwise, don't bother calling me again. There was a long pause on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he might actually step up. But no, of course not. Instead, he muttered something about doing my best, and hung up. Typical. The final act in this circus came a few days later when Erica showed up at the house. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days, but I wasn't about to let that guilt me into caving. "I just don't understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "You've always been there for me. Why are you turning your back on me now?" I crossed my arms and looked at her. "Erica, let me ask you something. When you decided to write me out of your wedding, no mention in the invites, no father-daughter dance, nothing. Did you ever stop to think about how that would make me feel?" She didn't answer. She just looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I've tried so hard with all I could to be a father to you," I continued. "I've wanted to make sure you live the best life. And yet, when it really mattered, you chose Greg. That's okay. It's up to you. But don't expect anything from me." She started crying, but I didn't budge. I'd given her every opportunity to make things right, and she'd chosen to ignore them. This was the bed she'd made, and now she had to lie in it. When she left, I felt a weird mix of emotions. Part of me was sad. It's not easy to watch someone you care about walk out of your life. But mostly, I felt relieved. It didn't take long after the begging tour for the final blow to land. I thought they might finally get the hint after Erica's meltdown at the house. But nope, they weren't done yet. If anything, the silence that followed felt more like the calm before the storm. A week passed without a word from Lisa, Erica, or Greg. Honestly, I thought it was over. I started settling into my new normal, working, relaxing, and enjoying the peace that came from not dealing with their drama every day. But of course, that couldn't last. One Thursday afternoon, I was at work, going over some documents, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but it looked vaguely familiar. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello? Hey, it's Greg." Of course it was Greg. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing for whatever nonsense he was about to throw at me. "What do you want, Greg?" "Look, man," he started, his voice overly casual. "I know things have been rough lately, and I hate to be the one to bring this up, but we've got a problem." "We?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "What's this we you're talking about?" There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. "Look, I get it," he said finally. "But the thing is, I can't afford it. Erica and Lisa are counting on you." "Not my problem," I said bluntly. He started to argue, but I hung up before he could get another word in. I didn't have time for his nonsense, and honestly, I'd already wasted enough of my life cleaning up after him. That night, Lisa decided it was her turn to make a last-ditch effort. I was in the living room, flipping through channels, when she walked in holding a letter. Her face was tight, like she was trying to hold it together. "What's that?" I asked, not even looking up. "It's from Erica," she said quietly. "She asked me to give it to you." I glanced at the envelope but didn't move to take it. "What does she want now?" "She's sorry," Lisa said, sitting down on the couch across from me. "She knows she hurt you and she wants to make things right." I raised an eyebrow. "Does she? Because the last time I checked, her idea of making things right was asking me to pay for a wedding I've been cut out of." Lisa sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Can you just read it, please?" Reluctantly, I took the envelope and opened it. The letter was handwritten, which surprised me. I figured Erica would just text me again, but I guess she thought this would feel more personal. The letter was long, too long, honestly, and full of the usual excuses. "I'm sorry if I made you feel like you weren't part of the family. I didn't mean to exclude you. I just wanted to honor my dad. This wedding means everything to me, and I can't do it without your help." It was the same nonsense I'd heard 100 times before, just dressed up in fancier words. Nowhere in that letter did she take real responsibility for how she'd treated me. Nowhere did she acknowledge that I'd been the one supporting her all these years while Greg coasted. It was just another attempt to guilt me into caving. When I finished reading, I set the letter down and looked at Lisa. If this is her idea of an apology, she's got a lot to learn. "She's trying," Lisa said weakly. "She just wants her wedding back." "Well, she can keep wanting," I said, standing up. "And if you think I'm going to change my mind, you're wasting your time." Lisa didn't argue. She just sat there, staring at the floor. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. But then I remembered all the times she'd let Greg walk all over me. All the times she'd put his feelings and Erica's wants ahead of mine. Whatever sympathy I might have felt evaporated. The next day, I heard that the wedding was officially canceled. Erica had apparently tried to downsize, hoping Brian's family would step in to cover the costs, but they weren't having it. From what I heard, the whole thing turned into a massive fight, and Brian's parents pulled their support entirely. Lisa moved out a week later, taking whatever little she could carry. Thanks to the prenup, I could go on with the divorce without her getting a dime out of me. I changed the locks, cleared out the joint accounts, and started rebuilding my life. I blocked them from everywhere. I don't want anything that ties me with this nonsense family. Let Greg handle their drama. I was done. And let me tell you, it felt amazing.
I thought a trash can would be perfect for a trash thief like you. Jennifer's boss was clearly mocking her, dripping with sarcasm in his words. It was a company gathering at Jennifer's workplace. Where we were supposed to sit, a trash can had been placed instead of chairs. "Hey, there's some trash lying around here." As I was shocked by his words, he threw a dirty towel he had used right at Jennifer's face. The towel missed her face but grazed her shoulder before falling to the floor. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly picked up the fallen towel and threw it back at him. "My name is Mike Johnson. The Johnson family has been wealthy for generations, owning numerous properties in the state. I have a wife named Jennifer, and I met her thanks to one of those properties. We met while volunteering at a soup kitchen, which was held on a property I provided. We were drawn to each other and eventually got married. By the way, Jennifer continued her job even after we got married. Jennifer works at a local confectionery company called Thomas's Company. Thomas's Company donates leftover products to the soup kitchen. And, as a matter of fact, the president of Thomas's Company, Thomas, was my middle school classmate, and we still keep in touch. When Thomas started his company, I bought shares to support him financially. So, I'm a major shareholder of Thomas's Company, but I don't interfere with the management." One day, Jennifer told me this. "A social event next Sunday. Yes, the president, Thomas, wants to invite other local businesses and residents to enhance our connections. It's been in the works for a while, and it's finally happening. It seems Thomas, the president, is organizing a social event with local businesses and residents. Thomas's company was just a small confectionery making local souvenirs when it started. But it has grown rapidly over the past decade and is now a publicly traded company. Thomas believes the company's growth is all thanks to the local residents who loved the store and the employees who supported it. This event is meant to give back to them." "Sounds lively. That's so Thomas. He always loved organizing events like this." I laughed, and Jennifer smiled. "President Thomas loves seeing people having a good time. Oh, and we've been specially invited to the event. The invitation arrived this morning." "Really? In that case, let's attend. What about you? Will you have any duties that day?" "No, I haven't been asked to help, so I'll go with you." So we prepared for the event day. It's great that it's sunny today. Really, it is. The weather was perfect, and by the time we arrived at the venue, it was already quite crowded. "All right, see you later." "Okay." I saw someone I knew in the crowd and decided to part ways with Jennifer for a while. About an hour later, when I headed to the guest table where we were supposed to meet, I saw Jennifer standing by the table, not sitting down. Her usually bright and cheerful face was unusually tense and somewhat puzzled. What's going on?" Wondering what was troubling my wife, I squinted to get a better look. To my surprise, where our seats were supposed to be, there was a trash can instead of chairs. In front of Jennifer, who was left standing, was a man in a suit with a nasty smirk, saying something to her. Sensing the tension, I hurried over to them. Soon, I heard the man say, "I thought a trash can would be perfect for a trash thief like you." The man was clearly mocking Jennifer, dripping with sarcasm. I was stunned by his rudeness, but Jennifer calmly replied, "For your information, I am not a thief. President Thomas has approved donating discarded products to the soup kitchen." I started to understand the situation. Realizing it was about the sweets Thomas's company donates to the soup kitchen, I was angry at him for calling Jennifer a thief and was about to step in when I noticed a woman also watching the exchange with concern. She had a Thomas's Company employee badge around her neck. I decided to ask her who the man insulting Jennifer was. "Excuse me, who is that man sitting over there?" "Oh, I'm a friend of Jennifer's. It looks like there's some trouble. and I'm worried. When I mentioned I was a friend of Jennifer's, the woman's wariness seemed to ease, and she responded with a complicated expression. That man is Chris, our company's finance manager. He's President Thomas's nephew, and, well, he's a bit of a problem. Apparently, Chris, Thomas's nephew, uses his position to constantly harass his subordinates, especially young female employees. Jennifer had called out his behavior. Chris resented this and started harassing Jennifer in retaliation. The thief accusation was just another one of Chris's baseless claims. The woman reluctantly explained the situation to me. I'm sorry, we employees should stand up to Manager Chris. But I feel bad for Jennifer. Chris often flaunts his connection as the president's nephew, so no one but Jennifer dares to stand up to him. At that moment, I heard Chris's loud laugh as he continued to insult Jennifer. Hey, there's some trash lying around here. Chris then threw a dirty towel, which he had used, right at Jennifer's face. Luckily, the towel only grazed her shoulder and fell to the ground. I couldn't watch any longer. I quickly picked up the fallen towel and threw it back at Chris. Honey, weren't you taught in kindergarten that trash goes in the trash can? I glared at Chris, shielding Jennifer, who was startled by my sudden appearance. The towel I threw grazed Chris's cheek. His face turned bright red, and he kicked back his chair as he stood up, storming toward me. Hey, old man, what the hell are you doing? But I stood firm, still protecting Jennifer behind me, and retorted. I could ask you the same thing, throwing trash at someone. If you're so interested in trash, why don't you switch careers to a waste management facility? Chris, not expecting a comeback, widened his eyes in surprise. But soon he scowled in anger and yelled, Old man, do you know who I am? Chris stomped his feet like a child, and I watched him with a mix of disdain and indifference. Then, a panicked employee, who must have heard the commotion, rushed over to Chris and whispered in his ear, That's Mr. Johnson, our major shareholder. What? Major shareholder, Mr. Johnson? The major shareholder? What? Chris's face went pale, and he stumbled backward, collapsing into the chair behind him. He muttered in a small, shocked voice, his earlier bravado completely gone. Could it be Johnson? Chris muttered, staring at me and then at Jennifer behind me. Jennifer confirmed his suspicion by calmly saying, This is my husband. Nice to meet you. I'm Mike, Jennifer's husband. It seems you've been taking good care of her. I glared at Chris as I spoke, and he gasped in fear. No way, that Johnson, this old lady's husband, is the major shareholder. The name Johnson is common, so Chris never imagined Jennifer was married to the major shareholder. And Jennifer herself would never boast about being the wife of a major shareholder. So only a few senior employees knew we were married. But regardless of which Johnson she was, there was no excuse for his horrible insults. Staring straight at the still pale Chris, I said, By the way, I have a friend who runs a waste management facility. Coincidentally, I just met him at this event. He mentioned they're short-staffed. Shall I introduce you? What? Chris's eyes widened at my pointed sarcasm. But even as he sat there, terrified, he stubbornly continued to whine like a spoiled child. Don't get cocky just because you're a major shareholder. You can't interfere with the company's personnel decisions. I was astonished by his audacity. Trying to act reasonable now was pointless. I suppressed a sigh and nodded slightly. Well, that's true. As a shareholder, it's not my place to meddle in company personnel decisions, but... I paused, glaring intensely at Chris. He let out a frightened squeak. I'm a shareholder. I have the right to make recommendations. After that, it's up to him to decide. I said this quietly and shifted my gaze behind Chris. Following my gaze, he turned around. There stood Thomas, the president of Thomas's company, looking furious. Uncle, Chris called out in a high-pitched voice. terrified at the sight of his enraged uncle, and collapsed to the floor, unable to stay in his chair. Thomas glared at his nephew with far more intensity than I had. You harassed Jennifer, of all people. What on earth were you thinking? But I didn't know this old lady, Mrs. Johnson, was a major shareholder. Seeing him tear up while making excuses, I thought his nerve was impressive, but wished he'd use it for better purposes. However, his excuses didn't work on his uncle. Thomas grabbed his nephew by the collar and yelled at him from close range. "Jennifer is a savior of our company." Then Thomas began to recount Jennifer's story. This was before Jennifer and I met. Thomas had quit his job and used all his savings to start Thomas's company, driven by a desire to boost local industries. But back then, his marketing efforts weren't successful. Although the sweets tasted great, no customers came. Thomas's company soon faced financial difficulties. Many products had to be discarded, and he was in trouble. Jennifer, who was then working as a clerk, suggested that they donate the unsold sweets to a local soup kitchen. Thomas thought it was a brilliant idea. It cost money to dispose of the sweets, and if his company's products could contribute to society, it was a win-win situation. At that time, Thomas didn't know I was involved with that volunteer group. So, when I introduced Jennifer as my fiancée, Thomas was quite surprised. We were all grateful for the strange connection that brought us together. Anyway, Thomas's company started donating unsold sweets thanks to Jennifer's suggestion. And one day, a local media outlet featured their activities on their channel. They highlighted it as a model case of corporate social responsibility and deepening ties with the community. It was a short 5-minute segment, but it was well put together, and Thomas's good nature came through the screen. An influencer from the area happened to see the program and was deeply impressed. He shared Thomas's company's activities and products on his account in a way that resonated with younger audiences. In no time, this spread like wildfire across social media. Eventually, Thomas's company's activities were featured on a national information program. As a result, Thomas's company's popularity soared, and orders for their sweets flooded in from all over the country. The sweets were already delicious. Customers who ordered out of curiosity were surprised by the taste. And word of Thomas's company spread even more through word of mouth. A year later, Thomas's company won first place in the East region in a Best Sweets for Souvenirs ranking organized by a famous travel guidebook. Do you understand? We can host this event today all because of Jennifer's suggestion back then. Thomas said, savoring the memory, while Jennifer smiled wryly beside me. Actually, this story is Thomas's favorite when he's drunk. At our wedding, he shared this story during his best man speech, crying so much that calming him down was really tough. Even though Jennifer repeatedly told him, "Please stop, it's embarrassing," Thomas never listened, so she eventually gave up. After finishing the story for his nephew, Thomas let out a big sigh as if he were expelling all the air from his lungs. "Your mother begged me to hire you. She even got down on her knees. She was desperate because you kept getting fired from every job, so I reluctantly agreed to take you in." I had heard before that Thomas and his sister didn't get along well. During Thomas's company's tough times, she barely responded to his calls. But as soon as the company started doing well, she frequently visited him, pretending to be a caring relative. Despite being treated poorly, Thomas couldn't completely reject his sister, so she took advantage of his kindness and pushed her troublesome son onto him. "Uncle, please stop, not here," Chris yelled, his face turning red with shame and frustration as he was scolded in front of many employees. But Thomas didn't care about his nephew's feelings and shouted at him. "Shut up. Even someone as thoughtless as you can apologize to Jennifer and Johnson, right?" Chris's eyes darted around, but he finally gave in and hung his head. Then, in a tiny voice, he apologized to us. "I'm sorry." "I apologize as well. It was truly unacceptable for my nephew to behave so rudely. Seeing Thomas apologize with his nephew, Jennifer and I hurried to stop him. It's okay. Yes, Chris's work attitude is a problem, but I didn't intend for him to be forced to apologize like this. Exactly, Thomas. Please raise your head. As long as Jennifer and I aren't treated unfairly, that's enough. Both of you. Thomas finally lifted his head at our urging, smiled warmly, and said, "Thank you." Then, turning to the crowd that had gathered during the commotion, he apologized again and spoke cheerfully to change the atmosphere. "Everyone, I'm sorry for the disturbance with our internal matter. Today, at our sales booth, we are giving away one of Thomas's company's most popular Daifuku to each person for free. Please stop by and get one as a memento of today's event." As Thomas, with his round face like a Daifuku, smiled warmly, the crowd began to smile back. Indeed, Jennifer's suggestion might have been the turning point for Thomas's company's growth. But it's Thomas's wonderful smile and character that have kept his employees loyal and naturally attracted customers. Watching Thomas surrounded by people, I felt grateful to have such a good friend. "President, I'll help out at the sales booth." "No, Jennifer, you're a guest today." Thomas shook his head at Jennifer's eager offer. But my wife was already fully motivated, enthusiastically saying, "Leave it to me," with a triumphant pose. "I'm a part of Thomas's company too. Then I'll help with stocking the shelves," I added. Thomas screamed, "If the major shareholder starts stocking shelves, the other employees will be terrified." In the end, the booth where the president himself called out to customers and the major shareholder couple handled stocking and customer service was a huge success until the event ended. As for Chris, left behind, he seemed to have no energy left to do anything. He just sat in a corner of the venue, looking dejected and blending in with the trash can. Now, for what happened next. Jennifer told me later that the day after the event, an astonishing fact about Chris was revealed at the office. Apparently, Chris had been embezzling company funds, using his position as finance manager. One of his subordinates had gathered evidence and reported it to President Thomas. According to this subordinate, Chris had been a terrible boss ever since he became a manager, constantly making unbelievable mistakes and causing a lot of trouble. Seeing his behavior at the event, it wasn't hard to believe. The subordinate had tolerated Chris because he was the president's nephew. But during the event, it became clear that President Thomas wasn't entirely on Chris's side. The subordinate also realized that Chris didn't have as much power as he claimed. That's why the whistleblower took action. And although Thomas was shocked that his nephew had resorted to embezzlement, he personally led a swift investigation into the allegations. Evidence of Chris's wrongdoing was found everywhere, either because his cleanup was sloppy or he was confident he wouldn't be caught. His misconduct was confirmed as a result. Consequently, Chris was stripped of his position and reassigned to the waste disposal department. Even there, he continued to be incompetent. He miscalculated disposal estimates, shredded important documents by mistake, and even broke the machine by pressing the wrong button. Eventually, his constant mistakes became too much, and a meeting was held on site. Chris was reassigned as a janitor, handling pest control in the warehouse. I think he was lucky not to be fired outright, but who knows how Chris feels about his new role. Still, Jennifer and I hope that his uncle's wish for Chris to reflect on his actions and start over will reach him someday. As for the soup kitchen, Jennifer and I continue to volunteer regularly. We married late and don't have children of our own. But because of that, we want to ensure the children who come here can eat their fill without worry. Seeing their smiles as they enjoy a warm meal or a sweet from Thomas's company fills us with a sense of fulfillment. This activity, which has brought us together in such a special way, is something Jennifer and I are committed to supporting as much as we can in the future.